You're off the job, so we're getting a divorce. Get out now. I was flabbergasted as I was suddenly handed the divorce papers by my husband. Can you give me some time to think? When I asked this, my husband Paul granted me a grace period up until the next day and left the room. Upon checking the divorce papers, I noticed something written on the back. The moment I confirmed it, I immediately called the police. My name is Kathy. I'm a 35-year-old housewife. My husband Paul is 37 years old, and we've been married for 15 years. A few years into our marriage, I lost my uterus due to an illness, which brought up the topic of divorce. Sure, I wanted kids, but I married you because I wanted to build a home with you, Kathy. So let's not divorce and live together, said Paul when I was on the verge of falling into depression because I couldn't have children. Paul, being the youngest of 3 boys, had a father who was the CEO of a significant enterprise. After his father passed away, the eldest son took over the business. Things started to change for the usually kind Paul when he joined the family business at the request of his older brother. He used to come home on time, but around a year after he joined the company, he began coming home around midnight, saying he was working overtime, and he was often out of the house even on his days off, claiming he was working on weekends. Moreover, he began to avoid conversations with me. His expression lost its former cheerfulness, and he started showing a stern face towards me. No matter how many times I asked about it, I was brushed off with, "It's nothing. It's not something I need to discuss with you, Kathy." I started to feel suspicious about Paul's behavior and tried to have a discussion several times, but he found a way to refuse every time. I was sure something had happened either in the family business or at his parents' house. Did my mother-in-law say something to him? I started to think. There was a significant rift between me and my mother-in-law. She had harsh words for me because I couldn't bear children. "You're a barren woman. Why did you marry Paul? Get a divorce already. You're a nuisance." I was told these words every time we met, which eventually reached Paul's ears, and he was furious. "If you say such things again, I will sever ties with this family." Paul declared in a rage, and the matter was settled on the premise that I didn't have to deal with his parents' house. From then on, I distanced myself from the family, but I couldn't completely cut ties due to family gatherings and such. On such occasions, I had minimal greetings and conversations with my mother-in-law, trying not to show the overt estrangement to others. However, my mother-in-law was bad-mouthing me behind my back to the relatives, and a few of them who jumped on the bandwagon started to avoid me or chastise me as well. "Kathy, I heard you're taking advantage of Paul's kindness and telling him not to have any contact with his mother, even though you don't have any children. How dare you do such a thing as a wife?" I feel sorry that I can't have children, but as for my relationship with my mother-in-law, it was Paul who told me I didn't have to interact with her. I think digging up a problem that was resolved between the parties involved, without understanding anything about it, could lead to unnecessary misunderstandings and further strain relationships. The relative who seemed to be siding with my mother-in-law, who did not seem to expect a rebuttal, was taken aback by my words and attitude and quickly became angry. "You! How dare you act arrogant despite the fact that I'm kindly offering advice on family relations?" "Excuse me, did my mother-in-law say that I'm useless because I don't have children?" "Well, yes. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? I wonder why Paul married such an irresponsible woman like you, who can't do her job as a wife and can't even respect relatives and elders." "Why, indeed? Oh, by the way, Paul has decided to cut ties with his family if his mother calls me things like useless for not having a child or stone woman. What will you do when that happens? Will you tell Paul about this? Can you take responsibility?" When I brought up the issue of breaking off relations with Paul's family, the relative, who apparently didn't know about the situation, apologized in a small voice. "I'm sorry. I seem to have meddled unnecessarily out of concern for Paul's mother. I didn't mean to cause trouble, so could we pretend this never happened?" With that, she quickly left the scene. I was torn about whether to tell Paul, but decided to secretly tell only the mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, it seems you still have concerns about me not having children. I heard about it from a relative earlier. Should we have a thorough discussion again, with Paul involved? Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law turned pale and refused to discuss it. I'm sorry. It seems I conveyed the wrong message. I feel lonely about your and Paul's choice not to have children, but that's not to say I want to criticize it. Since my mother-in-law apologized promptly, probably because she didn't want to break ties with Paul, I decided to keep this matter to myself. For several years, we enjoyed our life together without children. Then one day, my brother asked me to join the company. We're getting older, and I was thinking that we shouldn't change jobs at this stage, but they're really insisting. It doesn't seem to be because the company's in trouble or anything. Paul came to me with a proposition. In fact, I'm currently a housewife, but in my working days, I saw various companies in financial difficulty as a management consultant. So I quickly checked the state of Paul's family's company, but there didn't seem to be any problem with the management. When I told him this, Paul decided to work as an executive at the company that his eldest brother took over after hearing the detailed story from his second brother. The reason for the invitation was simply a shortage of personnel, as an employee in a similar position had retired due to illness. About a year later, there was a change in Paul's behavior. He started coming home late at night, and his attitude towards me became cold. There was an ominous atmosphere. And then Paul said to me, "The housekeeper who was working at my family home has apparently quit because of a sudden illness. Kathy, you seem to have a lot of time on your hands. Could you work at the family home as a housekeeper until we find a new one?" That's what I was asked. The news caught me off guard, but when I asked for more details, it turned out that the main job wasn't so much being a housekeeper, but taking care of the granddaughter living in my in-laws' house. Apparently, the parents of the grandchild were in the middle of a divorce, and while they were going through that, the grandchild was in the care of the in-laws. The housekeeper had been looking after her since the wife of the oldest son, her mother, had already passed away. The granddaughter was a 12-year-old girl named Harper. They wanted me to look after Harper and do the house cleaning and meal preparation while she was at school. Seeing the situation, I decided to take on the job after asking Paul more about Harper. Harper seemed to be a little shy around adults. At first, she was quite reserved with me, and we couldn't have much conversation. But about half a year later, she began to consult with me about things happening at school and her concerns. I was able to hear many other stories from her. To increase the time I could spend with Harper, I suggested to the oldest son that I could take care of her at my own home as well. But... "You're planning to kidnap Harper because you couldn't have a child, aren't you? If you won't do our cleaning and housework, you're not doing your job as a housekeeper. We will stop employing you." He shouted at me, and when my mother-in-law heard this, "You're just now starting to want a child, Kathy, making Paul give up on having children, and now you're trying to take Harper. Harper is a girl, and even if you took her in, she would soon get married and waste Paul's money. We won't allow such a thing." I was rejected. Despite not suggesting to adopt Harper, the mother-in-law and oldest son exaggerated the story and blamed me because we don't have a child. Probably the mother-in-law doesn't want to keep Harper in the family line because she is a girl and can't be the successor. After the son and his wife's divorce, she definitely wants Harper's mother to have full custody. On top of that, she even told Harper, "You'll end up living in poverty with your mother. You shouldn't get used to living here. Kathy is already useless and brings no benefit to our family line." Harper was quite uncomfortable with my mother-in-law because of this. I was too astounded by this to say anything. I tried my best to keep Harper in good spirits while I was at the in-laws' house, making her favorite food and preventing her from interacting with my mother-in-law as much as possible. About a year later, I was told by Paul that there was something to discuss. When I arrived at the in-laws' house, Paul was waiting for me, sandwiched between the oldest son and the mother-in-law. "My eldest brother's divorce has been finalized, so you're no longer needed. We're getting a divorce too. Get out of this house as soon as possible." With those words, he handed me a completed divorce paper. I was shocked and said, "Please give me some time to think." I somehow managed to get the words out and returned home. Upon checking the divorce papers, I found a message from Paul on the back. Having seen this, I immediately reported it to the police, filled out the divorce papers, and went to submit them. A few days later, having moved to my new house and living alone, I was called to my in-laws' home due to a message from Paul. There, my mother-in-law, the eldest son, and Paul were waiting with stern faces. "How could you do this? You've taken away Harper's father, grandfather, and loving grandmother, and then you're pushing the child support on us?" Taken Harper's father away? Was he even being a proper father to Harper in the first place? And by loving grandmother, you mean you, right, mother-in-law? You said such harsh words, yet you dared to say something like this? How can you say that? I was thinking about Harper. My mother-in-law started off by blaming me for my actions. I had been secretly recording as much as possible the verbal abuse and harsh treatment Harper received at my in-laws, and given it to the wife of the eldest son, who was in the midst of divorce mediation. Thanks to that, the custody was successfully transferred to the mother, and it seems that the mother-in-law was harshly blamed by her eldest son. Do you think you can get away with this after what you did to my son's family? We're divorced, so it doesn't matter anymore. When I said this, Paul, who had been silent up until now, opened his mouth. This isn't my family. I have nothing to do with you people anymore. What are you saying? What do you mean? As not only my mother-in-law, but also the eldest son were surprised by the words of Paul and me, we ended up explaining everything to them. Actually, this whole incident was a strategy to report tax evasion by the second son of my in-laws' family. Although the second son had been loved by his father, he was disliked by the eldest son and was pushed into an insignificant position after his father's death, with his salary significantly reduced. The second son, who had his own company, was looking for an opportunity to quit, but he suspected his elder brother of tax evasion, as unclear settlements and expenses increased in the company that the elder brother took over. In the process, it was found that my mother-in-law and the eldest son had been treating Harper terribly, so Paul asked me to take care of Harper. Harper's mother was trying to secure the custody, but she was being forced by my in-laws' family, who were aiming for child support, to take Harper away and create a parenting record, making it difficult to get the custody. The difference in opinions between my mother-in-law and the eldest son about this matter was exploited by the mother-in-law, who often said such words to Harper. I was recording these words as much as possible and documenting the toxic environment at my in-laws' family. I was collecting evidence so that the mother could win custody. It seemed that Paul's strange behavior was due to the illicit acts of my in-laws' family, the situation Harper was in, and his anger at the attitude of the mother-in-law and others. And he wanted to save Harper but couldn't do anything about it. He thought about consulting with me, but hesitated whether he should ask me, who doesn't have a child and had been blamed in the past at my in-laws' family, to take care of the child at my in-laws' family. Paul revealed to me the entire situation after his parents' housekeeper quit. He asked for my cooperation, and I agreed without hesitation, springing into action. On the back of the divorce papers it was written, "Once preparations are completed, please report." Once I explained all this, the eldest son changed color and approached Paul. So, you guys reported it. What about the company? It's going to be ruined, isn't it? Paul calmly responded, "It's okay. Our other brother will take it over. We have a good consultant for the company's rebuilding. You don't have to worry about anything. Just serve your time for your crimes. Thank you for all your efforts in tax evasion and fraud." Paul then called somewhere. "So, as decided at the general meeting, you're dismissed. It would really help if you could sell this house for debt recovery." The second son entered the room with a few men. Alongside the second son were the cops. The eldest son and the mother-in-law, who were involved in tax evasion, were arrested on the spot for risk of absconding. Even as they were taken away, my mother-in-law, who was rude to me until the very end, made me laugh. Even if I can't have children, I've successfully dealt with the company's bankruptcy. I don't have to worry about being despised and disowned by my own child. Thank you very much for being such a good negative example. This seemed to hit her hard, and she left in silence. Paul and I entered the company that the second son bought from his parents, dealing with the illegal activities and unpaid wages accumulated by the mother-in-law and eldest son. We're working hard every day to recover the company. Even so, thanks to the remarkable skills of the brother, who had originally established and run his own company, it seems that we'll be able to rebuild much sooner than expected. Although I'd been away from the field for a long time, I feel fulfilled every day, reminding me of my active days. The sentence for the mother-in-law and the eldest son was heavier than usual, due to the large amount of tax evasion. Of course the parents-in-law's house was sold, and they were left penniless with nowhere to go. However, they won't know this for a while as they're still in police custody. Through a lawyer, I received several letters addressed to me from my mother-in-law. In them, she wrote things like, "Traitor, destroyer of our home," or, "I need your help as a family member. Didn't I accept you into our family even though you couldn't have children? Now can't you help me?" At first, I found it amusing to read these letters, but gradually I got tired of them and started to refuse to accept them. I'm occasionally in contact with Harper. I got a thank you message from Harper's mother for the support I'd been providing regarding Harper's upbringing. "Thanks to Kathy, not only me but also Harper's life was saved. Harper says you were the only one kind to her. Would you mind playing with her again?" Her words brought tears to my eyes, and then Harper, who was now on the phone, said, "I want to eat Kathy's cooking again. Can you make it for me next time?" This made me cry even more. Paul, who was nearby, was initially flustered but burst into laughter when he heard Harper's voice on the phone, quickly arranging for us to meet. Since our new home was only about a 15-minute drive from Harper's, we started to interact more frequently. We're busy with work these days, but once things settle down, I'm thinking of inviting Harper and her mom for a vacation. Even though Harper is not our child, I'm looking forward to watching her grow up close by.